Hello, this is Compass, and this is part 3 of my walkthrough of the Metropolix sequencer from Intellijel. So the setup is pretty similar to the other two videos. I have a pulse wave on the Dixie, and I'm using the bandpass filter today on the multi-mode filter, and that will become clear later on in the video. So I have a basic init patch, so everything is standard apart from as on the length. As per my other videos, I do prefer to have the pulses set to 16, so we're using all 8 stages, but after 16 pulses it will reset. Apart from that, it's completely standard. And today we are going to go through these stage buttons here. Now, this has taken me quite a long time to get my head around. I was hoping to get this video out a couple of days ago, but some of these buttons are very straightforward and some are not. So some of them won't take very long, and then on the Ratchet and the Accumulation button, that will take a bit more time and I may get confused, so I will try and explain where I've got to in trying to understand that. But like much of Metropolix, maybe understanding it isn't the whole point, and actually just playing with it and seeing if you like the results is more important. We will get to that. So to start with, we will focus on the slide button, which we touched on briefly in the part 2. So I have a sequence here going, which is just going along in time with our kick drum and resetting after every 16. So if you hit the edit button, these stage buttons then become nice and colourful. So to select one, we'll start with slide. You just press the slide button and then the image on the screen changes. And this will tell you which of the 8 stages you have put a slide on. So slides will work better on the stages where we have a held note, so I will put one on the 3rd stage here and one on the 7th stage, and you can see on the screen the 3rd blob and the 7th blob are now filled in, so we have slides on these two. And you can hear that we are sliding between the 2 pitches on that we've selected on pitch 2 and pitch 3, and then pitch 6 and pitch 7. And as per the previous video, if you want to change how those slides work, you go back to the track buttons here, and you hit slide. Okay, one of the joys of trying to film these at home, the doorbell went. Okay, so we're back. So we have 2 slides here, and if you go to the track menu and press slide, you can change the amount of these slides. So if we go up to, oh sorry, knocking the camera, right, if we got to say 50%, it's a little bit more obvious. And then if you change the gate type to tempo, then it'll change how these sound. And if we make them slightly more extreme, actually that's the other change I've made. On these sliders, they now go 2 octaves from bottom to top. We are in the scale of C harmonic minor. So at the bottom here, this note here will be C, and this one here will be C 2 octaves above. But you can hear the slides there, and if you go onto the acid, remember it puts the slide on the next step. Okay, so I'm not going to cover that. If you want more detail, we went through that on part 2, and I'll link that below. So far, so straightforward. Slides. So if we then want to remove the slides, we're still in the slide menu, we can just take them off and we're back to normal. So that is slide, that is relatively straightforward. As is skip, so if we go to edit again and we get these colours and press skip, we get the same image on the screen, and this simply will skip a step. So this one now, number 3, just won't play. Again, this is quite a good way of creating different patterns, different rhythms with the same notes. See, that sounds pretty good already, we haven't really changed anything, and this works well of course if you have the length set to a specific number of pulses, so it keeps resetting at the same time. It doesn't matter what you do on the slides. So not the slides, the skips, so you can just change something, keep changing it until you like something. Or you can change lots of them. So by doing this, of course, we've changed our 8 stage pattern here into a 4 stage pattern where these 4 aren't playing. Now, one of the clever things that Metropolix can do is you can then switch this, so you can have 2 different patterns using only the 8 sliders, and then you can invert that very quickly. And this is getting on to some functions which we will cover in subsequent videos, but if we go onto here, you get into a different menu, and you can then change, you can change what this switch does, which is extremely clever. And we will come on to this because it has almost unlimited amounts of functionality. Here it says now skip invert, and it's going to affect track 1. So we have these 4 steps going round and round for 16 pulses. If I then turn this button, which I've now told to invert the skips, these 4 will be skipped and these 4 will play, which I think is very neat indeed. So you have 2 different patterns which sound completely different. You can have them in different registers, of course, well, different octaves. So you can almost have like a bass one, and they're obviously still in the same scale. You can, of course, then set this switch to be controlled by CV, so you could automatically do this using another part of your modular system. So we have the bass and the melody, perhaps. Obviously, when you then come on to incorporating track 2, which we haven't even touched on yet, this can get even more complicated. So with only one simple set of 8 steps, you can already get 2 different sequences. Anyway, I thought that was pretty neat. That's the skip button. Let's remove those and go back to our... maybe we'll bring these down as well. Okay. So the next button is pitch. Again, this one is relatively straightforward. So you hit the edit button, press the pitch button, and then you can edit each of these. And what this does is you can override these sliders. So say, what's this one? This one is at the bottom, so this one is on C. So if we hit this one, we can change. See, if we turn it 1, it tells us what in here. It says C0, so it's currently playing C0. But we can, let's do it, make it easy, make it an octave. You can hear now, it's now playing C1, and it doesn't matter what I do with that. That slider is now set to C2, or anywhere in between. It doesn't. We have overridden this slider. So if you come across a pattern that you like, or a pattern that you know, you can program it in. So again, when we come to having 2 tracks, even though both tracks share these sliders, you may have a bass line that you like, and you can literally program in the notes per each step for track 1, and then track 2 can use the sliders. You can definitely have 2 different melodies, even though you've only got 8 sliders to work with. So again, I think that is very cool indeed. And then press the encoder button and you're back to... No, sorry, you're not back to reset. You are back to... Let's just check that. I clicked it in once and it went to C0. Yeah, so it then, if you press it once, it actually go to what the slider's on. So it's on C1 now. And then once you've done that, it won't change again. Okay, so we got to the top and press this in. It's gone to C2 and it doesn't matter where we go. Okay. And then the long press just sets the defaults. But what's quite cool is you can program it to be what it is right now. So I don't know what this is on. If I press it once, it'll tell me G0. Okay, so now it's fixed on G0. I can now move it down to C0. It's not doing anything, or change it to whatever, and it'll do it without me. And then I press it again, and we're now on what the slider says, which is D1. Okay, back to default. So that's pitch. That's quite straightforward, but again, really powerful. And once you can start to modulate things and include these, it gets even more complicated. Again, each of these videos seems to be getting more and more complicated, but that is the Metropolix. Right. So the next one is gate. Again, we touched on this briefly in part 2 because it does interact with the track gate button here. So if we hit edit, and press the gate button. Here you can change the gate length. So the standard as you boot it up, if I go into the track menu just to remind you, the gate length is 50%. So each pulse, the gate or the note will sound for half the length of the pulse. So even that has 2 pulses, doesn't it? Do we have? If I change this to 1 pulse, that's actually taking up half the gate, and you'll be able to see this if I. Oh, I've just knocked the camera again. Sorry. If we make it 100%, there's no pause between note 3 and note 4. 1 pulse is being held for the whole gate. So that's what 100% sounds like. But the standard, the default is 50%. Even if you're being held, there's a pause between notes 3 and notes 4, which is fine. So let's get on to the gate. Again, so this is like the pitch button. Changing this will override that 50%. So if we go back to stage 3 here and start moving it up, you'll see this percent goes up from 0. Great, so I decided to demonstrate it on a gate type where it's held. So if it's held, it's going to be held open for the whole length of time. We need it on a multiple, so it's now having 1 pulse, and you'll be able to hear it now. This is now, each of these other ones is 100%, but gate 3 is really quick, it's 10%. Okay, so there you go. User error, as usual. If you have it on the top gate type, this is going to be held regardless of how long the gate is. It's going to be held out open for the whole period of time. So now it's 100% like everything else. I've set stage 3 to 10%, so when I put it back to multiple, it's now 10% of the others. And we can now put it back up to 50%, which would be, say, standard. Here is half the speed of all the others. Now if I put it up to 100%, it should be the same as the others. Perfect. Anyway, so it's worth messing about again to get different rhythms that you might like, and if you can hold on. Again, in all of these, sorry, I should have said on the other one, there's an edit all. If you hold the Alt button and move them up, it'll change every stage at the same time, which is useful if you have different ones at different levels, but you then want to, you've got this sort of scale wrong, so actually they're all too long or all too short. So now I have every single gate different. And if I hit Alt All, I can reduce them all. But it retains, I guess, the ratio between each different step. You can definitely hear that that's making quite a big difference compared to if I reset it. Oh, maybe I need to get them all down to 0. Look, actually, I didn't know this. It's gone negative. No, it hasn't. It's gone to 0. Set to defaults. So if we go to gate, yes, they are now all on 0. Okay. So I'm not sure how useful that is. The effect seems to be quite subtle to me. But that is good. So these 4 buttons are relatively straightforward. The slide, the skip, the pitch, the gate, they affect each of the individual stages. Now we'll come on to Ratchet, which I'm a bit nervous about because this is very complicated. And frankly, I would recommend going back to the manual, but I will take you through my understanding of Ratchet. And at the end of it, I'm not sure how useful it is. Yes, Metropolix can do it. Does it produce musically interesting patterns? Well, I guess you be the judge. Okay, so I'm recording the ratchet section and maybe the accumulation section in stages, so apologies if some of the notes and some of the videos aren't quite seamless, but I keep having to go back and check the manual. So first thing to notice, I have slowed down the tempo. We're at 90 BPM. We were at 120, I believe, on the previous section. So this is just so that we can hear the ratchets a bit more easily. Okay, so ratchets. Well, Metropolix can do ratchets like any other normal sequencer. So you do have to change a couple of things. So firstly, you need to go into the track menu and you need to turn this thing, gate stretching, off. This is in the track 1 setup. We haven't really covered this, but we will come to this setting. Gate stretching is on by default, and that's what makes ratcheting with the Metropolix extremely complicated, and I am going to take you through that in a minute. But to start with, set it to off, and then let's get back to the ratcheting menu. Press edit, hit ratchet, and we can set ratchets on any of these stages. So I'm going to do it on stage 3 here, which has 4 pulses, and it's set to multiple pulses. So you hear at the moment 4 pulses, and I've slowed it down so you can just about hear all 4. So on this setting, if I then turn to 2, it'll do 2 pulses, sorry, 2 notes for each pulse, so 8 blips here. And this is where I start to think, why would anyone want to do this? Anyway, that's what the standard ratchet does. It will just do 2 notes for each pulse, so 8 here. This can get a bit more interesting if you then go back to the track buttons here and go to the division button, and you may recall if you then go to the bottom and the pulse count division, this is where using ratchets can get a bit more musical and a bit more interesting. So I'm going to jump back and forth into this setting. So now this is divided by 2, so rather than 4 pulses here, we have 2 pulses. The gate is set to 50%. So for each of those 2 pulses, we have 1 note on, then a pause, then a note on, then another pause. So we have 4 sections of this stage. And you can hear for each stage, it's doing 2 pulses. So it's going bleep, bleep, pause, bleep, bleep, pause. And if I take this back to if I take the ratchet off, you see what I mean? So when we've done the pulse divide by 2, you get 2 pulses here. It does pulse for 50% of the gate, then pauses for 50% of the gate, then does another pulse, and then pauses. So you get 2. If you increase the ratchet, you then get 2 bleeps for each of those sections, which I hope makes sense. So that can then start to sound a bit more interesting because you get a bit more of a rhythm rather than just random multiple notes. It then also gets slightly more interesting if you then turn this back to single. So if we turn ratchet off, so we're getting 2 pulses here. If you put it down to single, so we've got our pulse count set to 4. We're dividing each pulse count by 2, so we're getting 2 pulses on stage 3. But because we're only having a single, it doesn't do that second pulse. It does the first pulse, then pauses for the second pulse. And because the gate again is 50%, we're getting a note, then 50% rest, and then for the second pulse, you're not getting any note and you're getting the rest. So you're getting a sort of quarter note on here. And then if you increase the ratchet, you'll get the same time period of pause, but you'll get 2 notes instead of this first note. Which I think starts to become a little bit more interesting. It still becomes crazy if you put the ratchets up to say 8. I mean, then you could argue it starts to adjust the timbre of the oscillator, so then you could do it for sound design rather than sequencing. I don't know. So that is how Metropolix can do standard ratcheting. We'll now move on to its sort of trick, which again is complicated, and I'm still unclear as to whether it's completely worth it. Anyway, so if we then go back to the track menu, Alt track 1 this is, and turn gate stretching on. So gate stretching is on, and that's not the only setting. There are now in ratchets, there's multiply, there is multiply, there is pulse and gated, and they all do different things. So we will start on multiply and head back to the ratchet menu. So again, we have stage 3 with 4 pulses and set on multiple. So we're getting, we're getting 2, I want 4, so we need to set the pulse count division back to 1. So now we are getting 4 pulses. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's move on and look at ratcheting with gate stretching on. So if we go to the track menu, gate stretching is on now. Ratchets here are set to multiply, and this is important when we come back to it, because with gate stretching there are 3 different types of ratcheting. Yes, it gets even more complicated. So gate stretching is on, and we will go back to our stage setting, ratchets, and we will put ratchets on step 3 here. So step 3 has 4 pulses. It is set on multiply, so we're getting, at the moment, with no ratchets, 4 beats there. And it is slow, we're at 90 BPM, remember. So if I turn that up to 2 ratchets, we should get 2 ratchets for each pulse. So there are 8 ratchets. So what gate stretching does is that in multiply mode, it will do however many ratchets that you put here. So 2, I'm going to keep it at 2 just so we don't get hundreds of ratchets. It'll do 2 ratchets per gate. So here there are 4 pulses, 4 gates. Our gate is set to 50%. So for each gate, we're going to get 2 ratchets, so that's 8 in total. And we get 8. So now if we go to the pulse count division menu, and we change this to 2, there are now 4 divided by 2, there are 2 gates here. And we're doing 2 ratchets per gate, so there should be 4. And that's right, we have 4 notes on step 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fine. And again, if we then move that on to 4, we have 1 pulse count here, 2 ratchets, so we should get 2 notes. So again, this is quite a good way of getting some sort of different type of rhythm, combined with moving potentially the gate type to single to get some sort of different timing. So if we put it on single, there should be no change initially, because we're still having 4 pulse counts divided by 4, 1 gate, and 1 note. So we'll get 2 ratchets for the 1 note. So if I just change this back and forward, yeah, no change. If we go down to 2, so with the gate set to multiple, we'll get 4, which we've just gone through. But when you change it to a single, let's wait for it to come back round. We have 2 gates. We have 2 gates, but because it's on single, only the first gate is firing, and we're getting 2 ratchets. So we're getting 2 notes here, as opposed to on the multiple, we'll get 4. So there is a slight difference there. And if we then put it back to 1 here, we'll get the 8 ratchets. And if we put it on the single, we'll only get the 2 ratchets because we're only getting the first of that. And you can then experiment with some weird timings, which will produce different rhythms. So that is gated mode. All right, let's reset that. This should now give us our 8. Okay, excellent. The next mode with gate stretch, if we go back to the track menu, Alt track 1, gate stretching is on, and if we click on ratchets, we can change multiply to pulse. Okay, this is relatively straightforward because this is like normal ratchets. So we will get the number of ratchets that we want, so in this case 2, and they will play in the same amount of time as a single clock pulse. So here we have 4 pulses, 2 ratchets, so 8. And if we change the pulse count again, say to divide by 2, we get 2 gates. You see this is slightly different to before, so we'll get the 2 gates, but the ratchets will be within the pulse, so quicker rather than. Sorry, this sounds confusing. So the previous example, you get the same 4 pulses on this step, but when it's gated, they are per gate, so they're even, whereas here they're per pulse. So we get that kind of rhythm. So if I switch between them, we have this 2. So we still get 4 pulses, but there's a sort of a gap between them. If you change this to multiply, so you get the different rhythm. So multiply is doing the pulses evenly spread around the gate, whereas this will do every time there's a pulse on pulse mode, it'll do the 2 ratchets. And the reason we're getting the pause is because we have divided, we're getting 2 gates here. So we're getting, when there are 2 gates, there's the gate is 50% of each pulse. So we have 4 states in here. We have on, off, and then the on, with ratchet set to 2, we'll get 2 notes. I hope that's clear. It is a little bit confusing. Suffice it to say, if you just stop playing with it, sometimes you'll get a result that you like. And you can introduce syncopation and different kind of rhythm. So, you know, that is quite nice. So if we just reset that back to 1, and we should get our 8 pulses. Yeah, and we go to track mode, we get one more, in the ratchets menu, we get one more setting, gated. So when ratchets are set to gated, then the number of ratchets you set in the ratchet menu, so in this case 2, in step 3, we do not get 8 ratchets, as you'll see. We only get 4 ratchets. So the number here sets the repeat rate of the ratchet. So it's trying to do 2 ratchets per clock pulse, but the gate length on each step determines how many it will actually play. So it's trying to do 2, but the gate length at 50% isn't long enough for it to do 2. So it only does the first one. If you changed, if we go here and change the gate length, do something slightly longer, you see we get more ratchets, even though we've not changed any settings. It's trying to do 8, it doesn't quite get a chance to do 8. It does 8, but the second ratchet is much shorter because at 62% it's not long enough. And if we increase it, we get, again, a slightly different rhythm. Again, can be interesting just to play with it. It's quite hard to deliberately work out what's going to happen before you make any of these changes, because again, this also interacts when you change the pulse clock divided by rate. So we should have 2. So again, it's got 2 gates here, and for each gate it's trying to do 2, and in this case it can fit in those 2 ratchets. If we change that more to 4, we get 1 pulse, and it's trying to do it's 1 pulse, it's trying to do 2 ratchets per pulse and it gets to 4, is that right? And then it has a pause. So I found this very confusing to understand. I'm not sure I fully got my head around it, but playing with the number of ratchets, the gate length, the division length, and the setting on the track menu as to whether you're on gate stretching, gated ratchets, pulse ratchets, which is a bit more like normal ratchets, or multiply, you can get different rhythms. The default setting is to have gate stretching on, ratchets on, multiply, and then I think it's just a question of playing with some of the settings and seeing if you find something you like, and also playing with whether you want it on multiple or not. You can get some very good and different patterns just by changing what you're doing on some of these. Anyway, that's ratchets. It is very confusing if you're trying to dial in something very specific, but there are lots of settings for you to try and get some sort of rhythm that you might like. I think that's enough on ratchets, and we will move on. So I'll reset that to default. Oh, if I hit Alt and press default, they all go back to 0. Let's just check some of the other settings. We need that back to... Okay, no ratchets, we are back to standard. Right, we'll move on to probability, which thankfully is much more straightforward. If you hit edit and hit probability, this is as you would expect. Each of the 8 stages, if this is set to stage, you can change the probability of it actually triggering, and it starts on, let's stick to stage 3 since we're focused on stage 3, 100%, but you can just reduce it to whatever you like. So if I go down to, oh, I've just knocked the camera again, I have to stop doing that. At 50%, then you'll see sometimes this will trigger and sometimes it won't. Oh, I've also just shown you the other. If you press this in, you can change the probability to either the stage or, as I've currently got it, there's pulse. So there are 4 pulses here. Each pulse has a 50% chance of happening. So that had 3 pulses, even though we've set it to 4. Or you can set it to the whole stage. And as it comes round, we get all 4 pulses in this case. And hopefully we'll get 1. No, maybe if I keep reducing it. And actually, if you... There we go. We have managed to actually... It's 10%. So 1 in 10. This will now trigger. You can actually turn it all the way down to 0%, which is obviously just like skipping the stage. It'll never actually fire. So again, quite useful for... Right, back to defaults. Okay, so probability, much more straightforward than ratchets, just to introduce some sort of different rhythms. The next menu is the accumulation menu. And again, this took me quite a long time to get my head around. It's a simple idea, can be very powerful. To actually get it to work how you would expect is very complicated. And again, I would thoroughly recommend reviewing the manual. I will attempt to demonstrate what it does. Let us change this pattern though. We're going to keep it slow so that we can hear what is happening. If we change the stages to, let's say, to 4, maybe. Oh no, let's keep it to 16. So we're only going to use these first 4, and we're going to just have 1 pulse on each. Set them all the gates to multiple, so it's just going to go, and we'll go higher so we can hear. So that is C, so that's an octave above these 2. Okay, so far so boring. If we hit edit accumulation and select, let's select the, actually let's take this down to C. that'll be easier. So we've got basically 3 notes playing the same and 1 playing something higher, and we'll select the 4th stage. So what accumulation does is you can do it on any single stage, and every time it cycles, every time it gets to the stage, you can change the note, and it says here plus 0 or 1, or you can go all the way, you can go as high as you want. So as you can hear, this note is no longer playing C, it is going up the scale, and it is in scale, so it's important to note that it's in scale. So let's just check, I am in C harmonic minor, so it's going to go from C, it'll then go to D, it then won't go to E, it will go to D sharp, and it's going to cycle up. You can hear it's going up 1 step of the scale. Then it goes back down to the bottom and starts again. So this is sort of fine. I couldn't see, I mean, it adds a bit of variation, but you don't really want it to be going just up the scale. So what I thought would be interesting is if you could maybe have it jump an octave every so often, because then that could be a bit more musical. And so if you go to the accumulation menu and you set it to 7, so there are 7 notes in the scale, so you can hear that does jump up an octave, but then doesn't. I was expecting this to play C, and then they C in the octave above, and then C again, and you'd have sort of arpeggio, but it doesn't quite do that. And this is where this gets quite complicated. So if I take you to, just press exit here, you get to the main sort of screens, and if you turn it one to the right, this is a screen that we haven't gone through yet. But what this shows is the 2 tracks. Track 1 is on the top, and the notes that we're playing. So we're playing C, E flat, as I said, D sharp, E flat, then 2 Cs. And here, this little, I don't know whether you can see it, maybe not. This is telling you what the accumulator is doing to this note. So it's going +7, +6, +5, +4, +3, +2, +1, back to 0, and then +7. So I thought it would just cycle up and down, and the reason it doesn't is because of the settings that you can get to on this LIM, the limits button. So if you hold Alt and press the accumulator button, you get to limits, and this sets the limits for the accumulator. So the default is plus and minus 7, so this is 7 notes in the scale. So some of the scales you choose may have fewer than 7 notes to go from a C to a C above, and that means that this will go more than an octave up. But the scale I've set, it will just go an octave above, it'll go to the higher C and down again. You can set the negative limit, so you can get this to go down as well, and I can show you that very quickly. So we go back to the accumulation, so rather than this number here being +7, you can take it down to -7. It'll go down to the lower C and then gradually come back up to C and then back down again. Okay, I'm going to take it back up to +7, so it's going up. Alt, accumulation, we'll get to this again. So mode we'll come back to. Order and polarity. Now these two are really important. Order tells Metropolix what to do when it hits your limit. So when it jumps up to, in my case, +7, and the limit, as we've just seen in the menu above, is 7, what happens then? Well, what it's going to do is it's going to wrap around. So it's then going to go from +7 and it's going to add on another 7. And it's not going to get to 14 because I've set the limit to be 7. So what it's going to do is it's going to go from 7, it's going to go back down to 0, then it's going to count up another 7 and get to 6. And the next time it's going to add on 7, which will be 13, but I've already set the limit to 7. So it'll then go back down to 0 and go up again another 5. So that's why in the menu we aren't going +7, 0, +7, 0. We're going +7, +6. Here it is, +3, +2, +1. So if I set the positive limit to 6, it doesn't get as high. So this now is going +4. So it's going 4 notes up the scale. So then that is then creating, for me at least, a pattern which is interesting, because without changing anything, it's just jumping this up alternately. And I can move this up, and now it's playing an F and going up to the C. And that can be quite interesting, but because of the way wrap works, because of the way that it wraps around the limit, you can get, I mean, everything's always going to be in the same scale, so it's always going to sound okay, but you'll get a pattern of notes that you're not expecting, which may be exactly what you want. So if I go back to the limit menu, change that to 7 again, so we've got the scale. So it doesn't have to wrap. So that's the other complication. So we have wrap, we can have pendulum. And if I take you back to this screen, it's going +7, and then rather than wrapping, it's going back to 0. So this is now doing, hold on, let me put it back to C. This is now doing what I expected the standard mode to do. So this is, it's going backwards and forwards between what you're jumping to, and in my case I've set the accumulation to +7. So in pendulum mode, when I've set the accumulation to +7, it's going up an octave and then coming down an octave, hitting 0 and going up again, and alternating, which is exactly what I wanted. Of course, if you set this to less, say 5, then it's going to show you different notes. So rather than wrap goes up to your limit and then down to 0 and starts again if it's one note. Pendulum goes up to your limit and then starts coming down. So if we do it with 1 + 1, it'll be easier to see. And if we change the limit to maybe, so we don't have to wait for it to go up all the notes, we'll just get it up 3 and maybe down 3 as well. So this note is going from C and it's going up 1 note, 2 notes, 3 notes of the scale, and then 2 notes, and then 1 note, and then back. So this is then going from 0 up to the limit and back down to the limit. As opposed to wrap, which will go up to the top and then back down to the bottom. That's the difference between those two. You can also have random, so it'll just randomly pick a note between what this says and your limit in the jumps that you specify though. So I'm having it in jumps of 1, but we could do it in jumps of 3, and it's going +0, +1, +1, +1, +2. So again, I think this is, well, obviously in random mode it's hard to predict, it's the whole point. I actually prefer it in pendulum because you kind of can sort of work out what's going on, but let's leave it in wrap because that is the default. You can obviously have it then in unipolar or bipolar. So unipolar, it starts at 0, it goes up and then comes back to 0. If you did it in bipolar, it would go up, it would wrap down to, in this case, -3, then it'll climb back up to +3 and then down, so it'll go below the bass note. Again, in order to get these to sound musical, I think you need to play with them. So if I set this back to unipolar and pendulum and 7, we've got it on unipolar, pendulum 7, and then set the accumulator mode to 7. So this then, I think, if I just go back to the notes, great. So every 2 cycles it goes up a note. I think that sounds pretty good, frankly. The other thing you can do on this is, rather than doing it on a per stage, you can set the whole track to do this. So if we go back to the whole track, I mean the whole track, so all stages. We're only using 4 stages here, but at the moment the accumulation is only happening on stage 1, so this one is jumping up and down. But there's another setting. If you go to Alt Accumulation, the limits setup, and you set to mode is set to stage, so we're just doing the stage. You can change this to track. When this note is triggered to go higher, they all go higher for a cycle, and I think that does sound pretty good, actually. And obviously you can do it on the first note rather than I've got it on the 4th note, but that can sound quite cool. So that is accumulation menu, and again, can get very complicated, but you can see how you can get some very interesting patterns, even if they're not patterns that you exactly thought you were going to get. Okay, if I set that back to defaults and set that back to defaults as well. Okay, what is going on now? Okay, it's on track. Let's get it back to stage. I mean, to be honest, that sounded pretty good then, right? So that is one of the things about this. You suddenly final thing to mention is that you can set the accumulation on a per ratchet step, which I think will sound totally awful. I'm not going to go through that. You can set it on a per stage, which is what we've done, or a per pulse. So if you have multiple pulses here, you can have it kind of bouncing around on this stage. I've got 2 pulses now, which is quite cool, I think, actually. Again, let's get this back to defaults, and right, nothing on the right. So I think we're back. Right, let's go to 8 stages again, 16 pulses. Let's speed the tempo back up to, let's say, 125. And let's see if we can, which doesn't sound too bad. Okay, let's find something that's vaguely entertaining. So the final button on this, on these stage menus is CV, and again, this one I really like. So this is a great function. So if you go edit, get colourful buttons, press CV. So the menu then changes, and on each step you can specify an amount of control voltage. So it's on 0 and step. So you can also do it on we'll come to that actually, sorry. Yeah, on a per step basis. So if I move the, hold on, let's try not to get voltage up. Let's move it up as high as it'll go. You can see on the screen there's a step being created. So we get, I think, to +5, which is the max. I'm not sure whether there's a quicker way of getting there. Maybe there is. Okay, and you can maybe go down a bit. Let me just create a little shape here. And what this is doing is creating your own pattern of control voltage. Your own pattern of control voltage to do with whatever you wish. So I'll make one go negative as well. Now, you may recall at the start of this video, a very long time ago, since this is going on and on, I said that I'm using the filter in bandpass mode, and this was the reason why. So we have a shape here of voltage, which is going from the centre up and down across these 8 steps. Now this voltage that we've just created using this knob here is coming out of this plug here, A. You can actually see the green light is positive, and the red light is negative. So when it gets to the last one, the last step, you can see that the voltage coming out of here is negative. Now you can send this wherever you want. I've set it so it's coming out of A, you can set it coming out of B. You can send this wherever you want in the rest of your rack. It doesn't have to be related to this pattern, but obviously because you have control here, that is worth doing. So if I now get a cable and connect one end to A here and the other end to, for example, the jack here, which is controlling the cutoff frequency, then the cutoff frequency from where I've set it here at about 11 o'clock will be pushed up to the maximum and then down. Anything below the line will be below where we've set it, anything above the line will be above it. This will add an element and because it's in bandpass, we're going to have more of an effect. And obviously if I change this, so you can add an extra element of rhythm via the filter. Okay, too much resonance, and if I turn it down, some of the notes probably won't sound. Oh, I don't think we're even getting to that one. Let's see if we actually get to that one. This one isn't even sounding because it's too low. Let's try and actually get to stage 8 here to demonstrate that. Oh, maybe have I skipped it? That's so funny. Right, let's not skip it. You can hear this note is barely sounding because we have introduced negative control voltage, which is pushing the filter down almost to 0, so not letting this note here, not letting it sound. If we moved it up, it'll then come into the range of the bandpass filter, and you'll be able to hear it. Just about. So let's go back to the. Let's maybe not make it quite so extreme on stage 8, so we can actually hear it. You can just hear it. It's quite pleasant. Just very faint. Okay, so if we come back to the screen, at the moment we're doing it on a per step basis. If you press the encoder, you get to a it's P ramp, and so you can see that the line from stage 7 to stage 8 has become sloped, and in S ramp it's even more sloped. So SRAM means that whatever you set here, it will take the whole stage to go from the level on stage 7 to the level on stage 8, and you get this smooth line. PRAM, if we go back to that, it'll take one pulse. So I've got 2 pulses, so it goes down quickly and then it stays at that level for the second pulse. I believe if you press Alt and this encoder, it'll change all of them. So now we're on SRAM, so it's sort of smoothed out the and each change will happen over the course of each stage, so equally between each stage. You can see how different that is to the pattern or the sound that we originally had. Which I think is pretty cool actually. And if I go to step and then PRAM, so this jumps to the value on the next step quickly and then holds that level. Just going to change some of the extremes a little bit. And if I hold Alt and rather than just press it in, I move it down, the whole shape comes down together. So all stages at the same time, which is obviously quite useful if you think you've got the... So that's one thing, we can put it on the filter frequency, but obviously this is just control voltage. Oh my god, that's hard. There you go, so that's without, so it sounds a lot better with that going in. So we could put this anywhere, frankly. We could put it into the release on our envelope. It'll change the length of the notes, which is quite cool. Maybe better on hard edge. So that's quite nice. We can put it on accent, which I happen to have on the WMD Javelin here. You could put it on amp. That is amp CV. So that is effectively adding an extra layer of on and off to the envelope. But also, I mean, obviously you can put this absolutely anywhere. I have the pulse wave coming out of the Dixie, so we can use it to modulate the width of the pulse wave, which would probably be better on a different shape. And then we can change how much. See, I think that sounds pretty good. Where else can we put it? We could put it on, we could introduce some FM modulation, which always sounds interesting. Okay, because this can obviously get quite extreme quite quickly. So maybe if we have just a little bit. Still tricky, I think, to get that one sounding particularly musical. How about attack our envelope? Good. I think it sounds best on frequency. I mean, that immediately sounds pretty cool to me. And that's it. This has been a very long video, but I will put in chapter markers to skip around. If I haven't got anything right, please leave a comment below. A lot of these buttons are very straightforward. I think CV is extremely cool. Probability is obviously easy. Gate, limited, in my opinion, limited effect. Pitch, skip and slide, very interesting. Pitch especially, I think, once you start getting 2 tracks and you want to maybe fix one in place. Ratchets, hard to understand, but you can definitely get some interesting patterns, and the same with accumulation. I mean, I think you just have to play with them. I think in terms of transposition and maybe making interesting arpeggios, that would be interesting to explore. That's it. I'll see you in the next video.